Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Kyla Hannington, and I'm the Public Outreach and Engagement Division Manager with the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights, the county's civil and human rights education and enforcement agency. Tonight's interfaith conversation on faith, politics, and the pursuit of justice, a special event leading into Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. weekend, is brought to you in partnership between our office and the Prince George's County Memorial Library System. With me tonight as co-hosts are Tiana Davis, also with the Office of Human Rights, and Dr. Audrey Lau with our event partners, the Library System. Our guests tonight will talk from their perspectives on how faith and politics can be used to advance our humanity, our essential humanness, what to do when we find that they don't or that they aren't, and how we are guided to go forward in good ways tonight, this weekend, this year, and throughout our lives. The Office of Human Rights has been hosting or co-hosting interfaith conversations for many years now, both in person and virtually. We try to bring forward a variety of viewpoints and recognize that no one event can represent all people, and nor does any one speaker represent all of their faith. But we are excited for the wisdom and the humanness of the panelists who are with us tonight, some of whom are new to us and some familiar to our regular viewers. I'm going to start with their bios. It's going to take a minute, but I want you to hear who we have because our guests are fantastic. So first we have Qamar-ul Huda, who is the Michael E. Paul Distinguished Visiting Professor of International Affairs at the United States Naval Academy. He has previously served as Senior Policy Advisor for the U.S. Department of State Secretary's Office for Religion and Global Affairs, where he focused on civil society, religious communities, and diplomacy with non-governmental organizations. Qamar-ul Huda's book examines a variety of strategic peace building and conflict resolution activities conducted by Muslim practitioners and non-governmental organizations in Muslim majority communities. We actually had him talking about this book earlier last year, and we will put a link to that conversation in the chat tonight so you can check out a little bit more about his book. In that he explores ways that Muslim scholars, civil society members, and communities interpret violence and nonviolence, peace building, and conflict resolution in an interconnected, globalized age, focusing on methods, practices, and strategies. He also shows how a faith-based commitment can empower effective social, political, and intellectual action that results in meaningful change. Qamar-ul Huda charts a vision of contemporary ethics and peace building, pluralism, reconciliation, and dialogue. And Dr. Huda, it's just wonderful to have you back with us. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be back.
We also have Rabbi Abbi Sharofsky, who is also familiar to our regular viewers. She is the Director of Intergroup Relations and Rabbi in Residence for the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Washington. She was ordained by the Jewish Theological Seminary in 2012. Rabbi Sharofsky also holds a master's degree from the Davidson School of Jewish Education at JTS, and she previously served as the Deputy Director of the Jewish Welfare Board Jewish Chaplains Council. Rabbi Sharofsky is the recipient of local and national awards for work in and beyond the Jewish community. She serves in several lay leader capacities in the Rabbinical Assembly, including on the Executive Council, co-chair of the Gender and Power and Resolutions Committees, and is a representative of the National Council of Synagogues. She represented the Rabbinical Assembly at the International Jewish Committee for Interreligious Consultations 2023 Emerging Leaders Conference at Oxford, which brought Jewish and Catholic clergy and leaders from around the world. Rabbi Sharofsky is involved in many DC area interfaith organizations and advisory groups, and works with faith leaders, schools, government offices, and organizations to address issues of bias and hate, educate about Jews and Jewish identity, and create allies between communities. Yaya, who is new to us, is a spiritual seeker and co-host of Real Talk on God Talk, a podcast for people who skip church for brunch on Sundays. With her work, Yaya seeks to blur the lines between the secular and sacred in public discourse, helping people make meaning of their lives by exploring the unexpected ways spirituality is relevant to our everyday experiences. Yaya considers herself a religious non, the segment of American society that is religiously unaffiliated, and one of the fastest growing groups according to the Pew Research Center. Yaya currently lives in Washington, D.C., is a former chaplain, and holds an MDiv from Union Theological Seminary with a concentration in psychology and religion. Yaya, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And then we're very excited to have our fourth guest with us. Born and bred in Washington, D.C., Alex Barriento serves as lead pastor of Sligo Seventh-day Adventist Church in Tacoma Park, Maryland. He believes in creating spaces for communities to grow in grace and developing opportunities of service for the kingdom of God. A graduate of Washington Adventist University and Andrews University Theological Seminary, Alex is a PhD candidate in theological ethics at the University of Aberdeen, Scotland. He is an adjunct professor in the Department of Religion at Washington Adventist University. He currently serves as a board of trustee at Washington Adventist University and a member of the governing board of Adventist Healthcare White Oak Medical Center. He has served close to 20 years in pastoral and conference leadership roles, community organizations, editorial, and academic committees. So, wow, all four of you, thank you so much for being with us. We wanted to get started. I mean, we're very excited to have you all here, and we're just going to get started with you, Alex. I know you just got here, so welcome. You're live and on the air. And
thanks, Paul.
I want to get started with you because this whole theme came out of a conversation the two of us had together. And I was wondering if you could just take a moment to talk about how you see faith and politics and our humanness intersecting. If you can do that briefly, and I'm not sure that's possible, but if you could give it a go, we'd love to hear from you.
Couple seconds. I think it's natural for faith and politics to be part of the same conversation. The bridge isn't always clear, but I think part of the world is natural. You know, trees depend on the ground and we depend on the earth, and you know, we breathe the air that's natural to everything that we do. And so faith and politics, I think, go intertwined because they're interdependent. And it creates interrelatedness in ways that perhaps sometimes aren't as obvious, but perhaps the language is there for us to enrich what it means to be alive fully within the world we live in. So I think that's where I'll stop.
All right, thank you very much. And I'd love to hear from all of you, Rabbi Abbi, Qamar, Yaya. Well, actually, Yaya, I'm going to hold on you for just a second. I want to hear from Rabbi Abbi and Qamar for a second about how your faith perspectives shape or impact the pursuit of justice, politics, and our higher selves. How does your faith shape that?
I'll start it off. We can go in age order in terms of religions, I guess. Thank you. I'm glad. Yeah, I'm glad you got that one. So it's a really big question, Kyla, and and I keep trying to wrap my head around it, and I have a few notes, and I'm going to actually touch on something that's controversial and all of that. I'm thinking about today, especially today. Today's a really powerful day for me and for so many, with the agreements that have been reached between Israel and Hamas and the work that it took to get there. And I look at this as this incredible intersection of faith and politics, and not because this is a perfect agreement, not because it is not because everyone is getting what they want, but because there are so many values that are coming to the table to make that deal happen. And that's a scary thing. It's a scary thing. It's a hopeful thing. And among the many things that are heartening to me has been the bipartisan effort over the last few days. And you know, I speak for myself, not for my organization, of course, but knowing that there are people on both sides of the aisle who want to see humanitarian aid in Gaza, who want to see the hostages freed and returned home, who want to see these things happen. That's a sign of faith for me, that we can rise above partisanship and just uphold dignity and the need to move forward out of war.
Thank you. Qamar, can you speak to that?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be part of the panel. And sorry I had to come and go. It just seems like the streaming is not working here on my side. Faith and politics. This seems to us, and sometimes the way we think about it, sometimes the way we live it, and sometimes the way it's presented to us, and is binary. It's opposites. It's taboo. It's truth, water, and oil. It should never be discussed. Right? It's all these things, and I think we want to acknowledge that we are inheriting or being part of a culture, time period where all of these things are sort of the norm and accepted, right? But within this, there are still strands from another time period that faith in politics, faith in justice, faith in restorative justice, all these things were all central. They're all integral. It was all part of the same equation, same language, same discussions. It wasn't binary. It wasn't black or white. It was very much, if one is a faithful person, at least from an Islamic perspective, you are interested in having a just political system. If you are a faithful person, you're interested in fairness to all others and compassion, and create a reality that is touches on humanness, but it also has it is centered on the divine and the sacred, and things around us, in us, and others have the sacredness in it. So and so in many ways, I mean, some have argued politics could be sacred, and that's a big discussion right there. But the process of making a political systems, economic systems, just systems are all based on ethical values and thinking. And so one, I would say, for our times, this should not be a taboo, and we should address it in such ways that it's comfortable, at least from the faith perspective. And second, I think politics should be also viewed as a way of perfecting what's imperfect. We see things that are not that are sort of driven by the ego, driven by brutish the desires of this side versus that side, or my camp versus your camp. But perhaps we can think of it as those are sort of the gaps in making things more whole, and more better. So I'll just leave it at that. Those are my opening comments. The faith and politics should not be dichotomous or opposites.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. There's a lot I want to dive into. And I want to hear, you're here from a religious non-perspective. And so I really want to hear from you about humanity, about why we seek and question, and how our humanness promotes action, if you believe that it does, towards justice.
Well, first, thank you so much for having me. Really glad to be here. Second, I want to start by offering a maxim my foremother Bell Hooks would always say, the personal is political, right? And what is more personal than the expression of faith? Now, when we uncover and we kind of pull back the layers as to who is more inclined to be aware of their personal lives, their experience being inherently political, that there's a lot to tease out there. But I can use myself as an example, as a person that shows up in a Black body, as a person that shows up in a woman's body. Everything I do, every choice I make shows up and is responded to in a political way. And so even I can share a little bit of my own personal journey. I grew up in the Christian tradition, grew up going to church, a highly religious, highly faith-filled family. And yet my journey away from that, it was a journey of what I consider liberation, my curiosity about particularly liberation theology, Christian liberation theology, led me down a path of realizing that a lot of the binaries that Dr. Huda spoke about, when we tease those out, our being, who we are, how we work through the world, how we relate to one another, that is why we have religion, which is an expression of our faith. That is why we have politics, the way that we work together and make decisions. And so I think on the surface, it's so easy to think of those things as so separate. But when we kind of tease back the layers a little bit, they are, to me, so obviously just inextricable.
Thank you. I also want to encourage you, if you feel free to respond to each other too as we go forward. But I am going to ask, I'm going to ask one more question, but then I'm going to pause to let my colleagues ask and for you guys to respond to each other. In a few days, we're celebrating Dr. Martin Luther King Day and weekend. For many people, this whole weekend is a time of real thought and service. So I wanted to hear from each of you about service to others and how your faith tradition and your understanding calls you into service to others, and in what way, how that looks.
Happy to start us off. And so, as we head into our celebration of Dr. King, I cannot help but think about, our beloved community that he would talk about, this beloved community that doesn't quite exist here yet. A community where people have their needs met, where there's no wealth hoarding, where there's economic justice, where there's social justice, and those things, often when we think of Dr. King in a faith context, we think of him as a pillar of the Black church. We think of him as this Christian leader who may be concerned with these like otherworldly things one day in heaven, but so much of that beloved community is right here on earth right now. The ways in which we can interact with each other, the ways in which we are responsible for our brothers, our sisters, our siblings, and as speaking, I won't say on behalf of, but as a person who is a religious nun who does not align myself with an institution per se, that means that to be responsive to those concerns that are right here, right now on earth, I'm so glad to be a part of this interfaith conversation, because the institutions that I have to sometimes align myself with, think of the Black church, think of the ways in which so much that institution is like the bedrock of people, community care, mutual aid, like all of these things that are highly political take place in these places that are spiritual, sacred spaces. And so to kind of wrap it up, in terms of being a religious nun, not choosing to not align myself with these institutions, but valuing so many of the same things, I think that it's not of the institution, it's of the person to express their faith in community with others. And that was kind of all over the place, but
I love that last piece. Express your faith in community with others. And there was as you were speaking about Dr. King and his deep, Christian, who he was as a Christian. So many of the pieces that he taught have their, they come from the Hebrew Bible, from, some people call it the Old Testament, Hebrew Bible. The pieces that he really brought forward about dignity, about being created in God's image, about how we help others and have one set of rules for everyone, and we don't oppress the widow, the orphan, the stranger. Those are all coming from core Jewish texts, the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. So I feel like you teed up exactly what I was going to talk about, that these ideas, as you said, that are, end up being so controversial, of what does it mean to help someone who needs it and to make sure that everyone is granted a living wage. That comes from, that's in the Torah. That's not a revolutionary idea that came from nowhere. It is a cornerstone of Jewish faith, of Christian faith. I don't want to speak for Islam, but I know that there are aspects of Dr. Huda, please take it from me. this is all of this is tied together, and yet it's turned into so much of a political thing to have these basic rights.
Could I just add a few words? This is I wish we could speak about Dr. Martin Luther King all year long, to be honest, and not just on this weekend. His contribution is phenomenal on my life and on almost every other person I know, faithful or unfaithful, or try and seek faith, whatever label one uses. There's so many things that he has at least formed in my own thinking, theology. For some reason, I'm supposed to think about within the Islamic tradition, of course, his life, if it could be remembered, I remember just the love that he sort of permeated in all his relationships and his discussions and his speeches and his relationships. The love, and not just a love that's really centered on a humanness and thinking that this is a person that he is speaking with, or a congregation or community, that he really realized he's part of this community, and out of that loving connectedness, he really saw what needs to be addressed. And one of the things I think he was addressing is what we're lacking. And I think today we're lacking in our institutions that love, that generosity, that desire to be more compassionate, more insightful, more sort of thoughtful, empathetic, whether it's from the scripture, for some reason my brain is on that Samaritan merchant who stopped in Jericho Road in Luke. I'm not sure why that's on my mind, but it's also on my mind is the story of Joseph in the Quran, where he's gone through so many trials and tribulations with his own family and with being with the royal court, and even all this, that he had a really committed love towards those who did him wrong, and those institutions that forgot him and disconnected him from his own family and community. So I think this weekend, and hopefully throughout the year, we can think of Dr. King's timeless message of love defines our humanness, and also in the Islamic tradition, God is love. He has one of the names. It's called the love, and so there's this sort of overarching connectedness of human love. Is also internet connected to the sacred. That's what I would say for us to reflect on that.
I like to just highlight the fact that as we remember the King's Day really is a highlight on the sort of systems that create fractures for humanity as a whole, and the partnerships that are created in the midst of the conversations that affect humanity as a whole. And interestingly enough, to see partnerships that are created with differing views on life, faith, and constructs of life altogether, and to be able to be influenced, we could say, on the sort of powers like patience and having solidarity from Gandhi, or perhaps someone like Howard Thurman, who influenced MLK in a very significant way, which fear became a factor of how these systems are built, right? And so I think the conversation between politics and faith, as we reflect on this coming week, really to highlight that these two forms of powers are key to understanding humanity as a whole, because they are affected by these two angles. And therefore, to be human isn't to be just system oriented or perhaps only power oriented, but it's to try to understand how power and systems work together. And I think essentially what was being done is a reinforcement of what is it to truly flourish as a human being. And I think this is where MLK was saying that playing field affects everyone, more so others than another group, but at the key core of it is to try to integrate that conversation in the midst of that understanding.
If I could return a little bit to some of what Dr. Huda was saying about just the humanness at the basis of Dr. King's belief system, theology, practice. Kyla, we both have read this book in Heather McGhee's The Sum of Us. She talks a little bit about the ways in which our society has encouraged people, particularly white people, to vote against their own interest or to basically align themselves with austerity, right? So let's not invest in the public good. What are all the ways in which we are not responsible as individuals? We are not responsible for great schools, healthcare systems, medical care systems, but at the opposite end of that humanity, that humanness at the basis of, all of our faiths is responsibility to the other, not just like that abstract love, but when we really dig in, what does that love mean? That is responsibility for the well-being, the physical well-being of, your brother, your sister, your sibling. And so I really, when I think about that humanity, that human factor for me, like core to that. And I think across many faiths and in my own personal journey is how do I make meaning of who and where I am situated as a person in our society, and how do I express God or the divine or whatever that expression is for you through my action. So it's not enough to believe, but through action as well.
Yeah, my question actually kind of touches on what you were saying at the end there. I know people question like a-religious individuals about how they are able to live sort of a moral life without having that belief system. So I was wondering if you all could talk about how you can work in social justice or human rights, or you can help those causes independent of your faith, or rather how maybe whether or not your faith determines whether or not you care about certain causes. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Was that specifically for me, Tiana? Okay.
It's
My
for
apologies.
everyone.
Okay. I want to give anyone an opportunity, but I'm glad to start us off. And so I think as someone who is spiritual but not religious, so many people roll their eyes when they hear that. My personal journey from being a practicing Christian to being spiritual but not religious was one of liberation, like I said earlier. And, I think to Bob Marley, right? He says, and I believe that this actually came from Marcus Garvey, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. And, as a Rastafarian, many times when we think of interreligious engagement or interfaith engagement, we think of the often like lauded world religions, major religions, but there are so many expressions outside of Judeo-Christian Islamic religions that are often unrepresented and underrepresented, as well as religious nuns. And so to kind of bring it back, why I started with that emancipate yourself from mental slavery is because wokeness is such a bad word now. Like, to be woke is seen as such a negative thing. But truly for me, spiritually, that has come in through cultivating awareness, cultivating my personal awareness, and that cultivation of awareness and presence and tapping into something more, something transcendent. I chose to not align myself with an organized religion because I want to be able to have my point of reference be something that is inward, not external. And I think that when it comes to social justice or loving your neighbor through action, I think that to cultivate an inward sense of ethics or inward sense of morality, that comes from knowing yourself. When you're not aligned with a religion, it comes from knowing yourself and kind of, for me, fine-tuning my instrument with my body, my spirit, my mind, and finding ways that connects. And so often being poor is hard. Being oppressed is hard, like hard on your body, hard on your mind, hard on your spirit. And people are looking for something that will ease that. And for many people, that is religion, and that is, you can find that. But for those who can't and don't find that in those other spaces, or may have been excluded from those spaces, turning inwards and to community, and turning maybe to other people for that sense of morality, what feels right, what works, how are we engaging with each other in a positive way, that inevitably, I believe, leads to that social justice that you asked and talked about, Tiana. Like that sense of justice comes from being with other people and seeing the humanity in other people. And sometimes a religious text or a group can help guide you. And in many ways, those groups help guide me. But when it comes down to it, for myself and many agnostics, human secularists, religious nuns, that inward compass is sharpened in many ways from spiritual traditions and academic traditions and pop culture and relationships with people you love. Your question, because I said a lot, but
It did. Thank you.
Can you say the question one more time? Because I remember it. I also want to recollect my thoughts on it.
Yeah, no problem. So my question was, a lot of people question a-religious individuals about how they can lead their moral lives, or as it pertains to this conversation, like how they can care about certain causes without having that faith or being a part of these faith communities. And I was wondering if you guys could talk about how, your faith and your justice work can be independent of each other, or rather, they're not mutually exclusive, maybe is a better term.
So I think I sort of disagree on the being independent of each other. I look at them as more of interdependent on each other. So when you first asked the question, which is why I needed you to say it one more time. The first thought that came to me was an interfaith panel, oddly enough, that's my day job, of clergy and yes, I believe we were all clergy sitting there, talking about reproductive choice and reproductive rights, and why am I blanking on what it was? The question that was being voted on, it was right before the election, and it was about the question for the Maryland state constitution on enshrining reproductive rights within the state constitution. And we were a panel of almost everyone there was female. There was one person who identified as male. And there was this, and we all had our quotes and our texts, and we knew I know where it says in this text and this rabbinic source, and all of the proofs for why abortion and other issues of reproductive choice are sometimes called for by our faiths, and what it means to look for, what it means to have faith in those moments, and to turn to a set of rules and faith guided, use faith as guidance and use religion as guidance in in that moment. But this breakthrough in the conversation happened when several of us all started talking about different medical crises we had experienced as women who were pregnant at different times, and talking about pregnancy loss and talking about pain and trauma and stigma. And this beautiful thing happened where the political piece of talking about abortion and choice moved, and it became about the shame and the fear and the deeply troubling things that us as leaders in the community, people that have, like, literally some of us have a pulpit to speak at, still didn't know how to talk about this, and still didn't know how to talk about it in a personal way. And we were able to go back to our own personal faith and what did prayer do for us in those moments when we struggled and we didn't know how to talk about this. And I think about that moment not just as here was a time when I used the toolbook that I had and all of the sources to go and say, this is why this issue works and this is why this issue is permissible in my faith, but also to say, this is a room of leaders sitting here saying, we felt shame, we felt scared, we felt all of these things. And if we're feeling it, with all of the, so-called power and privilege that we have, how much more so are others feeling it? And how can we use this place of being clergy, of being faith leaders, of people that are able to talk about their faith? How can we use that to help others, no matter the politics of the situation, but simply to move through an extremely difficult choice and period in someone's life? Healthcare as a whole is so difficult, no matter what it is. And Yaya, one of the pieces you mentioned, healthcare as a right, and we argue about these things, and yet we're all so afraid to talk about them. We're afraid to raise them up in our faith spaces. But our faiths want us to be healthy. They want us to put our health first. And yet there are times when faith becomes the thing that prevents it. And whether that's fear or stigma or whatever, politics and faith intersect in a really painful way and prevent us from being able to move forward. So I look at that as that interdependence, and I feel like I've rambled off somewhere, and but I look at faith as something that keeps me going in a lot of political spaces, and these, especially when it's difficult. I saw there was a question that came up about the intersection this week of the inauguration and commemorating Dr. King, and what that all means, and how does faith guide us in that? Yes, that one. Faith is carrying me through that. The faith in people, that knowing that there are people who want to do good in this world, and there are people who want to raise up those who need it. And if we can't have some sort of faith in this very volatile political moment, I don't know, that scares me a bit, and that makes me sad. I worry about that.
Thank you for sharing and for bringing this question up. I was going to put it up, so thank you for addressing this. So this is from one of our regular, wonderful supporters of the Office of Human Rights, who says that she finds it interesting. She says, personal thought, that here we are celebrating Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday and the inauguration and a new leader on the same day. And so how do we intersect faith in these celebrations? And so Pastor Alex or Qamar, I'd love to hear from you on what was previously said, but also on this question. If either one of you want to jump in on this, we'd love to hear from you.
I mean, I think beyond the obvious reactions to how we feel about certain things coming up will be evident and maybe not mentioned at this point. But I think, like the world, like life, there are seasons, there are ups and downs, and faith also has seasons. Faith includes texts and moods that are lamentable, they are judgmental, they are moments of darkness, there are moments of deep despair, and joy and happiness and all that goody two shoe language doesn't really fit the mold of what faith actually is. If you notice that a great percentage of many sacred texts really live in dark moments. And it is not to say all of a sudden that darkness just simply turns into light. No, it's just that the reality of the world that we actually live in has this mode, this rhythm of life that we cannot deny. And I think the sort of Americanism we have gotten used to with faith is that faith is always light, it's always bright, it's always happy. That's not true. If that's the case, then we've gone into a retail store. But that's just not how faith works. It's a lot more darker because the reality of the world is fairly dark in its degrees of darkness, whatever that means. And then there are degrees of light. And so how do we intersect with faith in this sense? There are moments that we can lament about.
Qamar, would you like to speak to this or to what was previously said? So it looks to me like you might be muted.
Yeah.
Okay.
There we go. I was just thinking of all of my colleagues here and what they've said, and wanted to add to some of these great comments, and there's also some serious wisdom. But I know there are many people who are probably thinking that next week inauguration, there are some who are very excited and euphoric, and this is the best of times coming, and this is going to be, in some of the religious folks maybe this is when the kingdom is going to be established and so forth. I don't know. And then others are thinking these are dark times, and how do we survive through dark times? And again, the framing of this from faithful people is, for me, troubling, because again, it's binary, it's black and white, it's optimistic versus pessimistic, it's we're living in darkness and we have to figure out how to do that. But there is some like these things. I think we need to question the way we frame things, and I think our texts, our commentaries, are especially particularly from the tradition, how I interpret Islam. We are asked to, we have a consciousness that sort of desires to have a spirituality, to have a connection, to relate, to connect with others. Now, on the human plane, with all communities, we were created to get to know each other, to learn from each other and listen and be empathetic, to see from each other's, from their issues and experiences, but also be supportive when we need to. But in order to actually move through all this, the tradition really mandates one not to be pessimistic. You can't. It's just at least the Islamic tradition I adhere to. We can't be pessimistic. We can't just drop our hands and say everything's over, because the mutuality that the divine has in us is that we need to constantly work and support and make these experiences and nurture with each other, nurture and nature and support each other. At the heart of a lot of this is violence towards ourselves and violence towards each other, whether it's violence of thoughts, violence of doing, or violence of pretending, or whatever, and to address that form of subtle violence. So I think the upcoming administration, however it turns out, and all the things that I may disagree, many people may disagree with it, or maybe we have to have a sort of a transcendental thinking of the moment. We're not stuck in each and every poor decision. They're in all these decisions. It's our moment to, like you said so very well, Kyla, which is the call of service. We are called to speak and to promote and articulate arguments that seem erroneous and really horrible decisions, right? Whether it be against poor people, whether it against be the female body, whether it be against immigrations and immigrants, or the picking up of poor underrepresented immigrants and sending them without over to another place without knowing what's happening. I mean, all of these things, how you center a moral argument or an argument itself, depends on where you are centered. And I think these things that will come up in the next few years that are going to be challenging and is going to be costly for many things, and also actually really mandates a sort of a greater degree of involvement. And because we are inherently invested in all of this. So I think, as Yaya said very well, being poor is physically challenging, and I hear it's not just the socioeconomic poverty that's there, but it's all these things that are attached to being poor. That's really horrific, and we meaning the collective, we tend to disconnect and not be involved, or turn the page and not read about it and don't want to hear about it, and all these things that sort of divorces us from our interconnectedness really steps into our consciousness for having a transcendental spiritual need. So I think whenever we do not connect and we do not step up and do not speak and articulate an argument that is, that sort of presents a more proper, wise decision, I think we are being unfair to ourselves and to our traditions, to our faith, and to our humanness, and then to humanity. So I would just say, and I was hoping the rabbi would bring this up, but a lot of us spend so much time before getting to study our traditions with so much law and jurisprudence involved, and you spend hours and hours knowing the law, and it's not some sort of imagined world. Oh God, I went through those classes of law and it's Jews, so it's gone. They're actually a part of us. Those lessons of law and the past lessons, prophetic lessons, inform us in our decisions and thinking of how we think about today's conversation. So I just want to say there's a continuity of these traditions. It's not just something from the past that we can, it's gone, and I wake up today and it's no longer interesting to me. So I think there's a continuity of those traditions.
Completely agree. Yes, it's always interesting when I'll have conversations with Christians sometimes who are surprised that, like, oh, you follow those laws that are written there? Yes. Those are real living documents, and they've grown, they've evolved, they've changed. Yes. And they're also still a huge part of how we live and like guiding principles. There are verses from rabbinic tradition, from the Talmud, that guide me every day, and things that I think about of what it means to, not just, especially my work for the Jewish community, to not just be here for the Jewish community, but to make sure that I am helping and providing for other communities as well, because it's and at the same time, there's also this idea that Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Lezeh, that all of the Jewish people are responsible for one another. So I do think about that. What is the responsibility that I have to my immediate communities, as well as the ripples out? And I think that's something that I would venture to say that's something that each of our faiths has, of the and I wouldn't limit it to the Abrahamic faiths. I would say that that's something that I've seen in colleagues in so many other faith groups, and people who don't ascribe to a specific faith at all. I think that it's been said as well, this idea of what it means to be in community with each other as really being like, that's the holiness. And those holy pieces, those sparks come from how we are working with each other and how we are using the ingrained texts, the ingrained rules and laws and that foundation to continue to make this world better.
Kyla, I'd like you to ask. I'm going to skip my question. I'm going to ask you, just in keeping with a lot of the things that a lot of you have said. What struck me is that I've been, and I know there's a lot of young people out there who have been through and explored each and all and every place that you come from, that you speak to, and I think one of the things about all of them is this idea about love and how love kind of drives. But Dr. Al-Huda, as Kyla noted, that what we're missing a lot of times is love in a lot of these conversations. You get caught up in talking about rules and what is and what's right, what's wrong. How do we infuse love in these political institutions? How do we talk? I mean, because it's a universal thought, and Kyla, maybe you can clarify this a little bit too. But I'm really struck by the idea of this what connects us, but also what is missing in politics. And right now, I feel like a lot of what I feel is missing is love, like for our fellow humankind, whether across all of faith, class, race, gender, everything. We've forgotten almost how to love, and I'm just wondering what you all think. How do we put that back into our institutions and some of the politics that we're seeing today? I'd really love to hear your thoughts about that.
Can I think out loud before anyone answers anything? But I've been thinking over this question in a different angle. The absence of love, the word, within political texts, unless they are philosophically guided, right? It's interesting that suddenly love is coming out predominantly from female authors, Martha Nussbaum being one of them, Kyla, who I had mentioned to you, and how love permeates through emotions, but also makes it political in that way. And then the sort of interest that we're always talking about dignity, we're always talking about democracy, being cooperative, being formidable, neighborly, quote unquote, and love is missing, right, in these pieces. Why is that the case? And could the argument be that love is far too broad or too universally defined in so many ways that we just can't hone it down to one thing? But dignity is, right? So it's just a question to think about, because it is an action of which human beings are by agency are doing or interested in and trying to form partnerships with. And yet, when it comes to some form of literacy within political texts, where is it, right? And so anyway, interesting that perhaps maybe it looks too puny, of a word to be considered as something rational. But maybe it is a deeply profound emotional word, of which it is an emotional response to the perception of value, right? And maybe that speaks differently. But anyway, I just thinking out loud and add some fire to something. So.
Does anybody else want to tackle that? I think this is a great question, and we're getting close to time. Oh, we lost Dr. Huda. I know he's having trouble with his internet, but I think this, as we're looking and we're, how do we infuse love? And I wanted just to add, there's a viewer question that's very similar to this, which says, the viewer question, and I think it links, which is, I share the value of the panelists, and there are others for whom the highest values of individual freedom, individual power, and individual wealth. How do we bridge that divide? And Pastor Alex, as you're talking, I'm looking at this question, and I'm thinking, first of all, if you can answer this, that's amazing. But I'd love to hear from you all on this, and just as we close out, how do we put love in these spaces, and how do we bridge these divides?
I think Yaya had mentioned kind of the pressing together. And pressing together is not easy, especially when we're talking about democracy, quote unquote. Democracy has this like unsaid, unspoken way of life, which says, oh yeah, we're all in it together as a people, but really what we mean is, no, you're individually there, you're individually here, and we can do our own thing and still be a people. But what if democracy was pressed together to actually deal with issues in a more pressing way, meaning geographically, meaning more communally geared, more centralized over group settings rather than the borders and the lining and dividing of this and that. Democracy as a form of action that is constantly geared towards pressing towards each other, like bees in a beehive, right? They press together to make, honey and so forth. So instead of democracy being who wins at the end of the day, just because whatever, and so how do we do that? I think, and this is a long shot, there is an ancient text from a Christian text where love is emphasized by an apostle Paul. He puts love right in the midst of a troubling community. Least expected to mention love. And yet, rather than putting them in different islands, he actually presses them to come together and say, actually, love looks like this. When you actually disagree on the biggest items, but you press towards each other in this way. And I think he's being a little political, because that's everything against our nature, is to press together. We want not to have to concede our ideas or our values and whatever that looks like. But maybe love has a symbolic form to press us towards something that will hurt, and that we have to be patient with, So, yeah, if we're gonna bridge, you got to press together, It's easier said than done, of course.
If I may, I really appreciated that metaphor of pressing together like bees. And I think really a way that we could possibly reinfuse love into our way of life, into these institutions, is re-examining what love is beyond the warm and fuzzy, word love. And I think, we live in a society in which our understanding of our relationships to each other is so flattened. We live in a hyper capitalistic, hyper consumerist society that relies on exploitation. And when you exploit people, you can't see them for people. In order to perpetuate that, you have to flatten them and say, you're not really a person. Those people that are in prison, they're over there, out of sight, out of mind, not real people. They did something bad. They deserve it. So let's exploit their labor. It's okay. And, I'm oversimplifying it. But when we tease that out in our, take it from the macro, but make it super micro into our own lives, how we relate to the people in our households, I think that there's a re-examining of that, where love can maybe mean respect. Maybe it can mean seeing the sacredness in others and in yourself, in others' bodies, and in your own body. And I think reinfusing, and that honestly, that's a part of why my co-host and I have our podcast. We try to connect the sacred and the secular, things that people think are so different. But when you look at another person and you see that spark of life in their eyes, and how can you knowingly continue on the path of hurting and disrespecting and disregarding and discarding that person? And so I just offer, being someone who's a religious nun, I get to jump from text to text and sacred text to sacred text, lucky me. And so I just want to share a little bit from something that I consider a sacred text. And so Audre Lorde's sister Outsider, she had, one of her essays is uses of the erotic. People think of lots of things, but one thing that she really talks about in that essay is divine work, what it means to take pride in your work, live in your experience, be embodied, relate to your community. And I think, often we're just tempted to look at the macro picture, especially in terms of politics. Let me vote for the president, the federal president, and see how that can trickle down into my life. But I offer maybe the answer is really starting on a much smaller level and building it out from there, because we are ultimately just agents of our own belief systems, of our own faiths, walking out into the world. After I hang up on this call, I'm now in my professional life, or I'm now in my social life. But I still, I believe Dr. Huda and Alexander both said this, but, after we walk, and Rabbi said it, we walk with our faiths wherever we are. And so I think maybe cultivating that on a smaller level in our direct lives is one step.
Love is really hard. And I think that we need to also acknowledge that, how do you bring love in? There's so much vulnerability that comes with being willing to love and to have that there. And it's a lot easier to live in fear. And I think that that's something, unfortunately, that's been really sold in our society, that fear is there. And fear is what keeps us going. And I mean, that makes me, that's upsetting to me that, that we're essentially told in so many areas of this world that it's easier to, or it's better to fear what you don't know, fear who you don't know, or a situation, than it is to love them, or at least learn about them and learn about who they are. And the text that comes back to me is Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself, from Deuteronomy. And that's really hard, especially if you're not sure about who you are, or what's going on with you, and how much do you have to fix within you in order to make the world better. But that's a whole other therapeutic thing that I won't get into right now. But imagine what it would be like if we could just be that vulnerable with each other and be willing to take that chance and to move forward with that vulnerability and that openness. Kyla, you asked, I think one of the questions in preparation was, what do you want to take? What something you want people to do moving forward? Mm-hmm. The thing that I'm trying to do right now is listen, not for the sake of responding, but just so I can hear people. And that, that's, for me, it's a first step towards love.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dr. Huda. I know we're at time here, but I'd love to hear from you on this if you have something to share.
Well, thank you. Just a few thoughts on this topic is, what I think in the end, what's going to count and matter, and what wins is character over skills, and character and principles over rhetoric, and big social media taglines. And so we need to really think about the character and legacy that we are involved in and developing and leaving behind, and also and having with each other. And so this common thought is, a harm to one is a harm to all of us. And I think we should really consider that seriously. It's not just from my particular faith tradition. I've read it in the Hindu tradition and in the Buddhist tradition. A harm to one is a harm to all of us. in the Islamic tradition is when one part of the body aches, the whole body aches, meaning all of one person, then the individual, then the collective hurts. And I think we need to ask ourselves about how so gradually, for many variety of reasons, we've been disconnected from our own community members and friends and family and so forth. And so we don't even know what harm is and how others are being harmed. And so some sort of restorative thinking of the pain and harm that's occurring around us or within us, next to us, I think be a bit more conscientious about that would be really important, because we speak about love, we think about how love is going to come back to our institutions. This is a very practical thing. It's being more conscientious about the harm that's around us and how things are harming us and who is feeling the pain. And I think I would leave lastly is when people are harmed and traumatized, what are their needs, and whether we have it in us to be supportive. And if we don't, how can we support each other and find ways to be supportive? So yes, listening, being more empathetic, sympathetic, more conscientious, but I think being aware of the things that are flying around in the public sphere in terms of language, and the sort of insensitivities of things. But we need to take stock, sort of a spiritual stock, a real stock of what's happening, and be optimistic on how to be progressively and proactively in helping and supporting each other. That's what I would add.
Mm-hmm. This has been great. We never have enough time for these. Every time we do this, I'm like, we need to give more time, and then we don't do it. And so I just think about, we talk about these takeaways and this idea of love. And as you were talking, I was thinking that so often when I think we should love one another, I really mean other people, right? Other people should love one another, and ideally me too, right? But I don't necessarily really think about what it means for me, Kyla, to love the other, and the difficult other, or the other that I don't actually agree with. But it would be great if you guys would do that work. And so I love this message for all of us today, that it's actually something that we can really think, what does it mean to infuse it in ourselves and in our communities and in our institutions? And so this is really, so anyway, we are out of time. I'm going to have you all back, because this has just been incredible, and it's so important and so timely. Thank you to the library system for partnering with us to bring this to all of you, and to our panelists. Pastor Alex, this came from your brain. And so thank you for meeting with me and sharing your ideas and really having this panel come together. For all of you for joining us, Rabbi Abbi, Dr. Huda, you've been frequent guests with our office. I cannot express fully how much I personally learn from both of you each time you come, and how much I value your wisdom and what you contribute, not just to our programs, but to our wider community and the world in the work that you do. And Pastor Alex and Yaya, this is our first time, but it is definitely not the last time that we'll be having you as guests. So thank you both. Thank all of you. For those tuning in, whether you're watching now or you're tuning in later on demand, we really want to thank you. You are why we do what we do, and we hope to see you at another one of our events soon. We do have an in-person interfaith event coming up on February 3rd. It's on the theme of small acts of kindness. You can probably see what we're going with here. So we hope that you'll join us. That's Greenbelt Community Church at 1 Hillside Road in Greenbelt, Maryland on February 3rd. It starts at 6 o'clock. You can learn more about that on our website. We also have a lunch and learn series with the library that continues every Tuesday at noon. And we have many more things, so please check those out. You can see all of the wonderful things that the library has going on by visiting pgcmls.info/events. And you can visit our office by going to that thing on the screen right there, civilrights.mypgc.us. We hope that you all have gotten a takeaway from this discussion that you can take with you into this weekend and throughout the whole week and month, and hopefully put towards an act of community, an act of service, or an act of love. So thank you, everybody. Panelists, stay with us for just one more second. Good night, everybody.
Good night.